So Trump yet again threatened tariffs over Greenland. He wants Greenland. He says for security reasons, he wants to build what he calls a golden dome to prevent missiles from actually hitting the United States. Now, the United States does have the right. We have a treaty with Denmark to be able to build any military base we want on Greenland. However, it's still obviously it's Greenland is kind of an independent country, but it's actually still part of Denmark, and we don't control it directly. The United States doesn't control it directly. So that's the reason. That's what Trump wants. He wants to have the United States control it directly so that they can build any military base. Not to mention there's natural resources there. Granted, most of those are buried under a glacier, but that is what it is. So there's some thought to this, and I've thought about this already. Other commentators have mentioned this, and that is if the United States, Trump, is to really push this thing, it could, in fact, break NATO apart. Denmark, like some other smaller countries like Estonia, like the UK, they've been actually really big-time supporters of the United States' military adventures, geopolitical, their geopolitical agenda through the UN, etc. Granted, these are all small countries, especially Denmark. I think it's only got like 6 or 8 million people. So it doesn't have, much of a military, but it still has been right there to support the United States and almost everything that it wants to do. And it would seem pretty disloyal to do something like that to Denmark, to take over the island. I don't think that the United States is going to take it over militarily, but we are considering pressuring them to sell it to the United States. Such a move may really anger European leaders, and it could be another nail in the coffin of NATO. And I don't think that's a bad thing. NATO depends on the United States. NATO really isn't much of anything without the big population, the technology, and the budget of the United States. These other countries, historically, recently, they have been contributing to NATO, but historically haven't contributed very much to NATO. You think of Spain, you think of Germany, you think of Canada, for example. For a long time, there weren't even 2% of their GDP. That's changed after the Ukraine war. But these countries benefit a lot more than the United States benefits from this arrangement. And I would even argue that this arrangement, NATO, is actually a strategic liability for the United States. So you take, for example, what's going on in Ukraine right now. It's an awful war. It needs to end. There's some debate on what the causes of it. Some say that it's Russia trying to push westward to secure its frontier. Others are saying that it's the NATOization of Ukraine. It's the color revolutions. It's backed by the CIA that forced Russia's hand to play offensive defense. Either way, we have a war now, a proxy war. And you got some countries like Poland, for example, that has historical reasons to be really at odds with Russia. And if this thing escalates, let's say there's a false flag attack, let's say that Zelensky tries to shoot missiles into Poland again. If Poland is at war with Russia, that would mean by treaty the United States gets dragged in as well. Okay, so the United States, from their perspective, from our perspective, what strategic reason do we have to get in a direct war with Russia over Eastern Europe? Historically, the Soviet Union was a real threat. It was spreading authoritarianism around the world. Today, Russia is something of still an authoritarian country, but so is Western Europe. So why are we putting so much resources in defending these authoritarian countries? Germany and the UK, you get arrested for quote-unquote hate speech. Come on. The rationale doesn't really make sense as much as it used to. So with this pressure, to put pressure on Denmark to sell Greenland, to anger the EU and NATO over this, um, might be a silver lining to all of this. It may very well break that up. The European countries will have to be forced to start thinking about their own security. Maybe then they'll say, okay, maybe we shouldn't be importing all these Muslims. Maybe we shouldn't be, um, you know, being so gynocentric in their policies. This huge welfare state and all this DEI that they do in Europe. Maybe instead we should go back to the old way of doing things, have our own military, think about our own sovereignty. None of this EU stuff, which is really, it's not economic, it's a political project. And you can actually have a return to common sense to Europe. Then the Europeans will start to have a dose of reality that I think is long overdue. The United States gets direct control of Greenland. We don't have NATO poking around. And by the way, NATO is a corrupt organization. They were implicated in human trafficking years ago. Not to mention they're ineffective, and like I said, they're a strategic liability for the United States. I mean, we can have a return to common sense. But of course, the globalists, NATO is really a globalist institution. The globalists want to keep it there. And it's the globalists that have the biggest problem with the United States acquiring Greenland. So anyway, that's some of my thoughts on that. I think the United States should really consider purchasing Greenland. And if that breaks up NATO, I think that's all the better.